we're gonna have a look at the Amidah. The Amidah, of course, is something really, really rather vital to Tefillah. On page 98 is the Amidah, the Shmona Esrei for the morning. The Amidah is basically the same on the morning, the afternoon, and the evening. It's got some minor differences depending on which text you follow. If you follow the regular Ashkenazi text, or if you follow the Nusach Sfard, which is the Chassidic text, or the Sephardi text, there's some very, very minor differences on the way, but really it's got the same format all the way through. So let's have a look. Just before we get going, let's understand how the Amidah is built. You have 3 brachot at the beginning, which are called Birkat Avot, and those are the brachos of Avram and Yitzchak and Yaakov. We'll have a look at them. We'll see how they all fit together. It's pretty easy to see. You have the brachot in the middle of the Amidah. So during the week, you've got 13 brachot, which are considered to be requests inside of the requests contained inside of them. We'll see Mitzvah Hashem, but we've got requests that we ask God to give us wisdom and health and wealth, and we ask Him to send the Mashiach and to rebuild Jerusalem and to have the temple and everything that goes together with our personal requests. And then at the end of the Amidah, you've got the Birkat Oda'ah, which is thanking HaKadosh Baruch Hu for being the only entity that's capable of giving us what we're asking for. Now, the format of the Amidah remains pretty consistent. The first 3 brachot and the last 3 brachot will appear in every Amidah that you daven, right? Which means that it doesn't matter whether you're davening in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening. It doesn't matter whether it's a weekday, whether it's Rosh Chodesh, whether it's Shabbat, whether it's Yom Tov. It makes no difference. The beginning and the end is going to remain consistent. What is going to change is what's in the middle. The part in the middle is going to define what it is that we're praying. So anybody here who was davening in shul this morning, you'll have paid attention and realized that the first Amidah that was prayed this morning was Shacharit, the regular Shacharit Amidah. It had an addition inside of it for Rosh Chodesh called Ya'aleh V'Yavo, which when we get to, we'll have a look at it. But the second Amidah that was recited, which is Musaf, was centered entirely around Rosh Chodesh. Had nothing to do with the regular Amidah at all. Didn't bear any resemblance in the middle whatsoever to the regular Amidah that we pray every single day. The same is true when you're davening on Shabbos. The same is true when you're davening on Yom Tov. That the davening, the Amidah, is going to reflect the day. Which means on Shabbos, the Amidah, we daven in the morning, we daven 2 Amidah, Shachris and Musaf. And the Amidah is going to reflect the fact that it's Shabbos. And when it's Yom Tov, it reflects the fact that it's Yom Tov, right? Hold on a second. Just why are we adding in Amidot? So it all ties in. It corresponds to the sacrifices that were brought to the temple. So on a normal, regular day, there would be a regular morning sacrifice that was brought, and the Amidah of the Shacharit, of the morning service, corresponds to that sacrifice, to that offering. The offering that was offered up in the afternoon corresponds to Mincha. Why do we add another Amidah in today for Rosh Chodesh? Because on Rosh Chodesh another sacrifice was brought, a special sacrifice was brought for Rosh Chodesh, and therefore not having a temple right now and not having the ability to have the temple services, the davening that we've got is going to parallel the original services that took place inside of the temple. Yeah?
Did Musaf occur following Amidah?
You read the Torah first and then Musaf.
No, I know, but I'm saying historically, like when was Musaf contained within, like say, for Rosh Chodesh or Shabbos or whenever?
Oh,
or is it like subsequent to like was it put together? Like
it was put together. It was put together at the end of the first temple period. Which means up until then, when it was Rosh Chodesh, so a sacrifice was being offered in the temple, and that was it. That took care of the need to pray for Rosh Chodesh. Right at the end of the first temple period, when it became clear to the men of the Great Assembly, that the sages, it became clear to them that the temple was not going to, could not remain in existence, and that meant that the sacrifices were going to come to an end. At that point, they formalized the prayer services, which means that they gave us the Amidah that we've got, pretty much the Amidah that we have today, and they also introduced the various prayers are going to be recited on special days as well. So, for example, like today, like Rosh Chodesh.
On Shabbat, they didn't bring sacrifices, right?
Yes, they did. Interesting. The Gemara itself says it's interesting. All kinds of things that are done on sacrifices which are forbidden on Shabbat. So, for example, slaughtering an animal. What's it called when you take off its skin?
Skinning.
Skinning.
Yeah.
I know it was one of those complicated words. Skinning the animal, offering it up on the offering it up on the altar. All of these things are normally forbidden on Shabbat. However, the avodah, the worship in the temple, overrode the laws of Shabbat, and that meant that it was done, even though it's not something that you would have been allowed to do outside of the temple.
Light a fire to give the sacrifices?
A sacrifice, so the fire was a light anyway, right?
The fire was what?
The fire was a light anyway. The fire had to be a light the whole time on the temple, right? On the altar. Okay. I'm sorry, on the altar. But if for whatever the reason it went out, then yes, they would be allowed to relight it, even though it's Shabbat.
That's interesting because Shabbat barely flexes for any.
Yeah,
laws.
it's absolutely fascinating. It really is, and it seems that the temple is something which maybe the way to understand it is that the temple is a place which doesn't really exist within inside of time, the regular time that we know it. It's something which is above and beyond time. And subsequently, the work that needs to be done, the worship that needs to be done inside of the temple could be done, even though outside of the temple it was completely forbidden to do it.
Maybe a stupid question. What would happen if Jewish people just raise a lot of money and we build the Beit HaMikdash?
What would happen? Aside from international outcry, of overtaking, what would happen? I don't know. It's an interesting question. There is a.
Isn't that supposed to be God's work?
Well, there is a disagreement amongst the early authorities about how the temple is going to appear, whether it requires us to build it, or whether God is just going to bring it down intact. I'm not convinced that there is a great theological difference between the two, because I think that if we build the temple, we're going to build the temple anyway. The question is whether we're building it physically or whether we're going to build it spiritually, and that's going to bring it down. Which means that I think it's going to sound a little bit odd, but I think it's really a technicality whether we physically have to build it or not. The machlokas between Rashi and the Rambam, Maimonides, about how the third temple, how it's going to appear. It does seem, according to most opinions, it does seem that the Mashiach is going to come and then the temple is going to be built. If that's the case, then I guess we don't have to do anything right now, except perhaps to do tshuva. I don't know, to repent and to atone.
I'm sure a lot of Orthodox people would freak out if, for example, Netanyahu says, okay, we're going to start building the Beit HaMikdash right now.
Yeah, not just Orthodox people. I think a lot of people all over the world would probably start having interesting reactions to that. Anyway, so what do we do? First of all, a little practicality of it. We mentioned this yesterday. When you begin the Amidah, you're supposed to take 3 steps backwards and 3 steps forwards.
How come you don't see people doing that?
Really?
Does it matter how big the steps have to be? Or?
No, the steps actually are pretty small, which means the steps are really supposed to be that each step is the length of your foot, right? So you're sort of like, let's say those are your feet, right? So you would be going like that. It's not very much at all, right? So maybe you just haven't paid any attention to watching people shuffle backwards and forwards before they begin.
Looking at my feet too.
People really aren't too careful though.
I used to be able to look at my feet as well, but since I've put on weight, it's a
problem. It's
been a while.
I feel like people do a half step and then they start praying. They don't really
Yeah. So the image is like, what's the problem? The problem is like this. Like with everything, right? We don't pay very much attention to what we're doing, especially when we do it every day, right? So it just becomes a rote, and people don't really think very much before they begin the Amidah. But you need to think about it. You need to take your 3 steps backwards and your 3 steps forwards, and you need to.
Like if you're standing up like this, I can't move.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've got to.
You kind of turn to the side and you walk sideways, and then walk back, and then.
That was pretty good. You were like sliding over there. That was.
is that what you're supposed to do? Like, I mean, if you're
if you've got something that's blocking you behind you, that it's impossible for you to be able to move backwards or forwards, then try to find a place where you can get to, where you're able to daven properly. What are you doing? Why are you taking 3 steps? The 3 steps are there in order to move forwards, to join together with the Shekhinah. I think we mentioned this yesterday, right? The Shekhinah is a divine presence when you come to pray. That's who's waiting for you. Somebody told me just yesterday that they had the most incredible epiphany whilst they were davening. They realized that, you're davening in front of the divine presence. Like, why on earth do we allow ourselves to be distracted like that? Could you imagine if you were going for a job interview or something, or your boss calls you in, and like every 5 seconds you take a quick look at your phone to see if you've got a message, and like you sort of like stare off into space. He's trying to talk to you about giving you a raise, and you're like, like staring off into space and just like looking around like that. We wouldn't do that, right? Why do we do it when we're standing in front of God? I guess because we don't really believe that God is there. So that's something that we have to work very hard on in order to be able to recognize that God is there, and we've got to be focusing. This person told me that they'd accepted upon themselves from now on to pray only using a siddur, right? Always looking inside a siddur and looking at the words, because it's a lot easier to remain focused when you've got the words in front of you. There's a very famous Jewish joke, which again, like most Jewish jokes, it's not very funny, but it's rather deep, about a fellow he's in the shuk, he's gone to Machne Yehuda, and he's looking at all the fruits and the vegetables, and he's squeezing the tomatoes and looking at the peaches, and all of a sudden somebody bashes into his chest. And he looks up to see who was so rude to do that, and he realizes it's him. He's davening the Amidah, and he's got to Slach Lanu, and he's going like this because you're supposed to hit yourself on the chest when you get to Slach Lanu. And his wife had told him on the way home from shul, just pop into the, go into the shuk and buy some fruits and vegetables. He was already there, right? He just happened to, physically just happened to still be in shul, but in his mind he was there already. It's a problem. It really is. We have to try to stay focused on what it is that we're saying. I think part of what we have to work on is this idea of wanting to daven. Person should want to pray. Shouldn't be a chore. It shouldn't be something that we're doing it because that's what we have to do, but rather, for sure we're doing it because that's what we have to do, but we're doing it because that's what we want to do as well. And that's something that we have to work very hard on. In all events, we start off the Amidah with some very telling words after we've made our stepping backwards and forwards. We say, God, Sefatai tiftach, open up my lips, ufi yagid tilatecha, so that my mouth can sing your praises. Which means it's a plea to God. God himself understands that it's hard to pray. The sages, the men of the Great Assembly who formulated the Amidah as we pray it today, also understood very, very well just how difficult it is to pray, how difficult it is to have that sense of focus and concentration. So therefore we begin our prayer with a little bit of a plea to God. Here, help me out. Right? If you help me out, then I can do it. But if you don't help me out, then it's not going to happen. Now, like I mentioned, I'm a big fan of the Art Scroll Siddur. I think the Art Scroll Siddur is very good because, first of all, it lets you know what it is that you're saying. So each paragraph has got a little heading in front of it to let you know what it is that you're about to say. As you can see over here, this is the Avot, the brachot that are going to correspond to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so you need to know, again, a little bit of practicality over here. When you come to, there are 2 different ways of bowing inside of the Amidah. We bow 3 times when we say Baruch Atah Hashem. So when we say Baruch, we bend our knees. When we say Atah, we bend over at the waist. And when we say God's name, we bring ourselves back into an upright position. Right? Those are said, yeah.
Can you demonstrate this bending for us?
Who, me? It's been a while since I was able to bend properly, but okay. It's really not, it's not very complicated, right? So you go, Baruch means that you bend your knees, right? Okay. Atah means that you move forwards from the waist. Forward. However, you don't have to knock your head on the table, right?
Since some people go as flat as a table.
Again, it doesn't really make, what you've got to do is, like you said, right? You've got to do a 3-stage bow. Right, so long as the 3 stages are visible, then you're okay. So Baruch, Atah, and then Hashem, God's name, and you stand up straight. Now, if you want to do that If you want to do it, with all kinds of dolphin-esque,
I'm not. I don't want to.
frills, then for sure, please feel free to do so. But there is no necessity to do it. I remember many years ago they had in Purim.
I'm not trying to be weird. I mean, it's an important thing to know.
No, I don't think you have to try.
Okay.
It's not very important.
It's just about being careful, kind of like the 3 steps back or 3 steps forward. Some people don't. Some people are so used to saying these prayers that they're not really careful with it.
There was many years ago in the yeshiva on Purim night they had a spiel. One of the guys did. It was really very, very funny actually. One of the guys did what he's thinking whilst he's praying the Amidah, and the first thing you hear is he bows down real low, and he bangs his head on the table, right? Clunk. And the first thing you hear, it's like a monologue, a 10-minute monologue, is ouch. Right? You don't have to do that, you really don't. Which means that you could just do what you've been doing up until now, it's absolutely fine. The format of the Amidah is something very special. In order to be able to ask God for all the things that we want to ask Him for, right? And that's what are known as the bakashot, the requests that we ask for. You've got to define who it is that you're standing in front of, which is what we'll have a look at Mitzvah Hashem. But that's what Birkat HaAvot, the blessings of the patriarchs, that's what we're doing. In a sense, we're defining why it is that we're standing in front of God and asking for these things. Then we're able to ask for them, and then we're able at the end to thank God. Like I said before, we're not thanking God for giving us what it is that we've asked for, but rather we're thanking God for being the only entity that is capable of giving us what it is that we're asking for, even if He doesn't. Right? Yeah.
So what about the bending when people are done? I grew up conservative, so I never really saw that. The left, the right, the center, the
right. So when you finish the Amidah, you take your 3 steps back, because again, you took your 3 steps forwards in order to receive the divine presence. So at the end, you take your 3 steps backwards, and then you bow to the left and to the right and to the center. And now the reason you're bowing to the left first is because your left corresponds to God's right. God is facing you. Right? I'm facing you, you're facing me, which means that my right is opposite your left. I hope.
That's correct.
No, thank you. That really did require some kind of something. Yeah. So when you bow to the left, you're really bowing to God's right. Right. So, and that's how you finish the Amidah. Right. Left, right, center. Okay. So let's go back to the beginning of the Amidah on page 98.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Sorry. How come the Modim, what's it called? The Modim, how come we bow differently in this one?
Because the idea of bowing, the 3-stage bowing, is to do with the bracha, right? With the 3 words, Baruch Atah Hashem. So you've got 3 distinct moments where you've got something to do. In Moedim, we don't have that. It's got a different text to it.
What about the Leinu?
Huh?
The Leinu? In
Aleinu also, it says, you can just bow yourself forwards from the waist. You don't even have to bow down in the way that you do for Moedim. You just have to make some kind of a recognizable bow.
What do they mean? Why are we bowing at those specific words?
Why are we bowing at those specific words? Because here in the Amidah, they are highlights of the Amidah itself, which means that we've got to. One of the means that we've got of remaining focused on what we're doing is knowing that we've got certain things we have to do on the way. I once heard an interesting idea. When you recite the Shema, for example, so you kiss your tefillin at certain places, right? You kiss your tzitzit, right? It's to keep us focused, visual aids. In the Amidah, you can snigger as much as you want, but visual aids are definitely, they're all the rage right now. It's interesting that, in Judaism we've had visual aids for thousands of years already. But now in educational things, you people were probably all brought up on visual aids, but I wasn't. Right? We just learned things were written up on the blackboard, and then you just had to, that was it. There was no concept of bringing something in to make something more real for you. I tell you, I've told you on several occasions in the past that I'm somewhat mathematically challenged, and I had a lot of problems, like working out volumes of cubes and things like that. For me, it was pretty difficult. You know what? Actually, believe it or not, what made it easier was when Rubik introduced his cube, and there was something there to look at that had sides and bits that you could add them all up and multiply them together. That made it a lot easier for me than it was just seeing this stuff drawn up on a blackboard. I can see that my struggles with math is of no interest whatsoever to anybody. So we will just continue over here.
Rubik was an actual person?
I don't know, but his cube was an actual cube.
Yeah, no,
I think it was. I think it was called Rubik. That's why it's called Rubik's Cube, isn't it?
makes sense.
I took the stickers off and put them in order.
You know what you remind me of? I used to have a cartoon at home of it's a laboratory with mice in the maze, trying to get the rats out through the maze to see how they can do it. And you've got these two rats digging their way through with a spade, right, and coming out with a little hole they've dug on the other side, saying, well, that wasn't so hard to figure out, was it? So yeah, you just take off all the stickers and just put them all in order. And the problem is, though, that it loses its stickiness after a while.
But then you just get another one.
Oh, the good old American
also
dream.
take a
Silly me, right?
Yeah.
Releases all.
What's that?
You can also crack the tip with a pliers, like how to undo it like the right way, and just what's it called? Reassemble it.
Gosh, how come I never knew any of these things? I spent hours trying to work.
No,
this.
you
I
don't
never,
break it. That's the way to actually like reassemble.
I never succeeded. It must be said, but I spent hours trying to get all these things aligned. The best that I could do was like two sides or something, and then just like I had to ignore the other two sides. That was
Yeah,
the best.
way on the right side.
Actually, now that I think about it, there are 6 sides
Yeah.
in a cube.
I was going to say.
As you
was
can,
thinking
as you,
about it myself.
as you can see, well, there were only ever 2 sides on the blackboard. We only ever had 2 sides, right? Anyway, when you begin the Amidah, so you start with the Baruch Atah Hashem, so you should be bowing. That's a 3-stage bow, right? So knees, waist, upright. Baruch Atah Hashem, Elokeinu Elokei Avotenu, the God and the God of our forefathers. You should know, in general, when it comes to prayer, whenever you evoke the forefathers, you are about to ask for something which, in your own merits, you don't really have enough merits to be able to ask for it, right? Which means that it should just be like a little light for you each time when you're praying and you come across the forefathers in whatever format it is. You should know that you're about to ask for something which, by yourself, is going to be a little bit difficult for you to be able to ask for. So we're tapping into the merit of the forefathers. Now, if you stop and think about it for a minute, maybe we're shooting ourselves in the foot a little bit over here, because you would have thought that if you get up in front of God and you say, listen, God, I'm pretty much a bum, it must be said. I don't do what I'm supposed to do, and I'm not really worth very much. But guess who my grandfather and great-grandfather and great-grandfather were? Guess who they were? They were Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I don't know. Does that sound right? It's as if you're saying to God, okay, I'm no good, but my great-grandparents, they're great, and don't pay any attention to the fact that they're great and I'm no longer great. Don't focus on the wrong thing over here. Just give me what I'm asking for, because they happen to be probably the last people who ever did what you wanted them to do. I don't know. Doesn't sound quite right. Maybe we should be getting up in the Amidah and saying, here I am, the God of all the wicked, evil kings that have been, inside of the history of Israel, and then we can say to God, listen, however bad I am, I'm not as bad as them, so maybe you should treat me kindly. Right? What are we doing by focusing on the Avot, on the forefathers who were the ones who established everything, the ones that God loved, and through that incredible love, that's why we're here today. Why is it going to help? So the answer, of course, is something very basic, and it's something very beautiful, that we all get our spiritual DNA from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Right? Which means that when we're standing in front of God, we're not saying, I'm a bum, I'll always be a bum, but my grandfather was really neat. What we're saying is that right now things might be a little bit difficult for me. Right now I may not be doing what I'm supposed to be doing, but you should know that inside of me I have all the spiritual DNA required in order to become who I need to become. Again, we're asking God to allow us to make that connection and to be together with Him through our connection to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
If that's the case, why don't they put Shema Kolenu right after that?
Because we have to ask for something. We have to ask for things first. We'll get to it in Mitzvah Hashem. We'll see. The Shema Kolenu a prayer which is kolel. It's
No, I'm saying
inclusive of everything.
If you're asking the schools of the others, then and listen to my prayer.
No, but what we want, we're doing it the other way around, which means that we're going to start off with the schut, with the merit of the avos, and then we're going to ask what we want for, and then we're going to say to God, because even then God might say, why should I do this? So Shema Kolenu, listen to our voices. Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov. Why are they mentioned? Why don't we just say Elokei Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov? Right? Why are they mentioned as a God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob? So the answer is because each forefather, each Av, had a different relationship with God. God is not interested in clones. He's not interested in people who are the exact replicas of somebody else. That's not what's going to give God what's needed over here in this physical world. So Abraham represents the concept of chesed, of kindness. Isaac represents a concept of serving God, of what's called avodah. And Jacob represents a concept of Torah. And that's why it appears over here as Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Velokei Yaakov, because the relationship that exists between God and Abraham and God and Isaac and God and Jacob is different. And that's something that we need to try to tap ourselves into. There's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot which says, Al shloisha dvarim ha'olam omer, there are three things that the world sits upon, the world is founded upon. They are Torah, Avodah, and Gemilas Chasodim. Right? Torah and worship and kind deeds. Says the Maharal, they correspond to the three Avot. So Torah, it's in reverse order. Torah is Jacob, Avodah is Isaac, and Gemilut Chasadim, kind deeds, is Abraham. Which means that the foundation of the world is founded upon the three Avot, and the Jewish nation is founded upon the Avot, which means it's like a circle within inside of a circle.
How come Moses isn't mentioned?
How come Moses isn't mentioned? It's a fascinating thing. There's a at one point God says to Moses, I'm going to kill everybody out, I'm going to destroy everybody, and I'll start again with you. Right? And what does Moses say? Moses says to God, in the oral tradition it says like this, Moses says to God, listen, if you've got a chair with three legs that can't stand up, then how's a chair with one leg going to stand up? Right? Because Moshe is not an Av. Moshe is not a forefather. Moshe is Rabbeinu. He's our teacher. And it's two very, very different dimensions, two very different concepts. First of all, a father, the dimension of fatherhood is the ability to love your children unconditionally. It's the ability to overlook the mistakes that children make and to try to help the child along even when the child is not doing what you want it to do. A Rabbeinu, a Rav, is somebody who doesn't have that kind of flexibility. He's here to give over information. He's here to give over to teach. And it's not the same relationship. Moshe is telling God the most incredible thing over here. If I were to establish the Jewish people, the Jewish nation, well, imagine what would be. I am a Rabbeinu, right? I am a Rav. What does that mean? I teach, which means that if the people are prepared to follow my teachings, then they'll be my disciples. And if they won't, they won't. Imagine what the Jewish people are going to look like after a couple of generations. There won't be very many left. They'll just be the very dedicated, the very righteous, and the very pious, and everybody else will have fallen by the wayside because they don't fit into the disciples of Moshe Rabbeinu. Whereas Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are all inclusive. They're including everybody. Regardless of whether we're doing what we're supposed to do right now, we're still included inside of that idea of being part of the Jewish people.
At some point, Yaakov is referred to as Yisrael.
Yeah.
Does that have anything to do with what you're saying in terms of...
Kind of. Yisrael is a name that's given to Jacob when it's referring to the founder of the Jewish nation. Jacob is a name that's given to Jacob when he's talking about Jacob, the individual, the father of the 12 sons. Now, if you take a look inside of the psukim in the verses in the Torah, you'll see that sometimes you can have a verse with both of them in there. And that means that we've got like some kind of like a dual message that's being given, that's being, referring to Jacob as the individual, and also Yisrael as the leader or the founder of the Jewish nation. Right, so over here, what do we have? We say Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov, right? And we don't call him Elokei Yisrael, because we're talking about the nascent beginnings, the foundations of the Jewish people, which are being built upon the three avot, these three fathers over here, the patriarchs. And then we say, Akel Agadol Agibor Vanora Kel Elyon Gamel Chasadim Tovim V'Konei Akol. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives his kindness to everybody. V'zocher Chasdei Avot Umevi Goel Livnei V'nehem Laman Shmoi B'Avo. Right, so we're talking about a God. He's going to bring a redeemer. We God of love. Melech Ozer Umoshir Umagein. The king, the helper, the savior, and the shield. And then we say, Baruch Atah Hashem, Magen Avraham. Now the Magen Avraham, what does that mean? The shield of Abraham. So we've spoken about this in the past, but it's worth mentioning it again because it's kind of interesting. There is something, when it comes to weapons of war, there is something that is different about a shield to every other weapon. And what is that?
Defensive.
It's defensive, right? Which means that a shield is passive. You don't do anything with it, you just get behind it and it's supposed to shield you, it's supposed to save you from danger. All other weapons are weapons that you've got to be actively involved in using in order to be able to get benefit from them. Magen Avraham is the idea of being the shield of Abraham. God is the shield of Abraham. But there's another shield as well we have inside of the Jewish world, which is what? Magen David, right? Something which is relatively famous because Magen David Adom, right? The Jewish Red Cross Society, which is really the Red Magen David Society, and it's interesting that the two dimensions of Magen, of a shield, are referring to Abraham and to David, and the reason for that is they really represent the beginning and the end of Jewish history. Because Magen Avraham is the nascent beginning of the Jewish world, right, the Jewish nation, and David represents the Mashiach, right? The Mashiach, in Hashem, should come very, very soon, but the Mashiach is going to be a direct descendant of King David, and that means that it's almost like we've got a promise of being shielded throughout history, from the beginning until the end, Magen Avraham until Magen David, which in Hashem, like I said, we should experience very, very soon.
Is that why we bend before that?
Focus, whatever, I guess so. Good, okay, we're going to stop over here in Hashem.